Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict Triathlon podcast, and a happy new year to everybody. You're listening to a very special new year edition of the show. Helen's not with us this week. I'm pre-recording this one, and as I mentioned last week, Hel's got to pick her interview of the week, which was the pretty fantastic interview with Meredith Kessler. What did you think of that one then? I'd love to know your thoughts. We are at OA Tri Podcast on Twitter, and we are at OA Podcast on Facebook. This week I get to pick my favourite interview of the year, and I did go backwards and forwards with a few actually, but in the end there could only be one winner. So I've edited back together the two parts of the interview that I managed to do with Mark Allen back in the spring. For those of you who don't know Mark Allen, he is a former six-time world champion in Kona, amongst about a bazillion other different wins that the guy had, but he's also a really interesting and unique human being, and I absolutely love this interview. It runs for ages. I think it goes for about an hour and 15 minutes, so fantastic interview to listen to when you're out for a long run. Mark really knows how to tell a story, and there's lots of interesting stuff in here as well. Not just about racing and triathlon, but about his spiritual life and shamanism and all kinds of things that some of you are going to find, I think, probably very interesting. So yeah, without any further ado, I'll hand us back over to Mark Allen's interview. Next week we'll be back with the usual format, and we'll have an interview with Cam Wurf. So join us then. I wish everybody a very happy new year, and thank you very much for listening. Here's our interview with Mark Allen. So it's a great pleasure to welcome the legendary Mark Allen onto the podcast. Mark, how on earth are you today joining us from, are you in Santa Cruz?
I'm in Santa Cruz, and it's actually overcast and cold. I turned my heater back on, which usually I don't have to in May, but hey, it's cold. You got to stay warm, right?
I'm sorry to have to tell you this. It's about 27 degrees centigrade outside here. We're having a heat wave in England at the moment.
Wow, that is really warm. That's great.
Yeah, man, I've got the curtains drawn, the sunset's there. It's actually too hot in the office, which is unheard of. So thanks for sending a little bit of sunshine our way, I guess, man.
Yeah, you got it all today, that's for sure.
Yeah. Hey, so listen, I wanted to give you the chance to tell your story because from the feedback we've had from a lot of our listeners, we're a relatively new podcast. We've been around about 2.5 years, and a lot of our listeners are new to the sport. And it's great to get somebody on like yourself with a wealth of history. So I'm going to give them the greatest hits if they don't know much about you. You were 6-time Ironman Hawaii world champion. You were 10 times winner of the Nice International Triathlon. You had am I right in saying this, was it a 21 race winning streak in the late 80s?
21.
Wow. And you were voted ESPN's Endurance Athlete of All Time as well, on top of all of that, which is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, that one was actually a surprise. It was in 2012, and ESPN was having a contest they wanted to figure out who the greatest athlete of all time was, which, how do you compare the different sports? But what they did is they had different categories of athletics, and people got to vote. So there was, football, boxing, golf, tennis. There was endurance, and that was the category that I was in, and it was a worldwide poll, and they had 5 of us as the finalists in greatest endurance athlete of all time. And somebody, actually a friend of mine, saw it, and they go, "Hey, you're in the running for greatest endurance athlete of all time." I'm like, what? Talk about a surprise, because I come from triathlon, and obviously triathletes know a lot about triathlon, but I didn't really think the rest of the world was keeping track. Anyway, I was voted greatest endurance athlete of all time out of the 5 finalists, and then they paired me up. Then we all got paired up with athletes from different sports, and the next round I was paired up with Muhammad Ali. So pretty tough to beat Muhammad Ali, and even if I did, I would have felt bad, because he's such an amazing athlete and an amazing person. But it was actually a great honor to be acknowledged for what I did in endurance, and to have it be on a worldwide stage where triathlon can stand up and hold its own when compared with every other endurance sport out there: cycling, running, cross-country skiing, you name it. It just showed that there's a lot of respect for what it takes to do well in this sport, and that was a real honor for me.
Yeah, and I think it was a little bit before triathlon's kind of blown up massively, hasn't it, in the last couple of years? And so it must have been really nice to have had your sport sort of recognized and represented in that way before that massive kind of global burst happened, hey?
Yeah, I mean, triathlon has been obviously building since its very beginning back in 1978. There was a big boom in the 80s. That's when Ironman kind of went onto the world stage once the race was moved over to the big island of Hawaii, and that was in 1982, and ever since then, there's just really been a big growth worldwide, first in the U.S. and Europe, and then as we know now, it's everywhere, South America, over in Asia, a lot of great places that it's continuing to reach and inspire people to take up something that maybe when they first saw it, they probably thought, geez, I couldn't do that. That was my thought. I saw the Ironman on television in 1982, and I thought, that's nuts. How can you do that? How can you go 2.4 miles in the water, 112-mile bike ride, a marathon, 26.2 miles, and get it all done in one day? But when I very first saw the Ironman on TV, as I watched, I was seeing these pretty ordinary people doing this extraordinary thing, and it just sparked something in me. And I thought, I need to go there and see if I can be one of those finishers. And that was what inspired me to take up the sport. I was going to go to the Ironman and just try to complete it once. And obviously, there was a grander plan that was being put in place when I saw that race on TV and decided to go there. But
so I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah, my beginnings were just like everybody else. There was something about watching an Ironman, watching a triathlon, that inspired me to go, let me see if I can do that, and turned into this amazing career that is still obviously a huge part of my life.
Wow, yeah. So I wanted to ask you about this. Obviously, there wasn't a huge amount of triathlon around at all, and certainly not publicized well and on TV back in '82. So how did you first come across triathlon? Was it literally seeing the Ironman on TV in '82 that was the first time you'd seen it, or were you already taking part? I know you had a swimming background as a kid.
Yeah, I was an age group competitive swimmer from the time I was 10 all the way through university, when I was completed that at 22. And back then there was no future to anything beyond that as far as athletics. So when I graduated from college, I thought, okay, that's the end of my athletic life. But then 2 years later, at the age of 24, that's when I saw the Ironman on TV, and I had actually never heard of a triathlon. I didn't know what one was. I'd never heard of the Ironman, and I was just mesmerized, that the human body could do that. And I obviously had 12 years of competitive swimming. I was mediocre as a swimmer. I'll be the first to admit that.
Perhaps not by my standards.
Yeah, well, so when I saw that on TV, I just thought, I have to go there and try that race. And that was in February that I saw it, and I was on the start line of the Ironman in October the same year. As a 24-year-old, you can do crazy stuff like that. You can go from nothing to thinking you're ready to complete an Ironman in 8 months or 10 months or whatever it was. And I didn't know what I was doing. Back in '82, there were no coaches. There was no resource that I could go to figure out how to train for these three sports. So I knew how to swim. I had a friend who was a cyclist, and he kind of set me up with a bike and took me out for some rides and kind of showed me how to do that. And then I eventually hooked up with a guy who was also training for the Ironman and who had done it once before. And so he kind of helped me with general structure. But, it was just going out there on my days off and doing as much as I could, and then recovering when I was working.
Wow. And so, I mean, I've heard your story before, but was it really as simple as a case of you went to Hawaii just to see if you could cross the finish line? You just thought,
this is this amazing event. I'm going to get as fit as I can and just see if I can cross the finish line.
Yeah, I had this secret goal of trying to see if I could be a top 100. I don't know what I based that on, but I just thought that would be really cool if I could be in the top 100. You have to understand, in 1982, the level of competition in the age groups was not like it is today. It was a new sport. Very few people knew what the heck they were doing with their training. But I ended up actually coming out of the water with Dave Scott right in the lead that year. And I sort of thought,
right?
well, I was a swimmer, maybe that's the end of my day. I stayed with him all the way through the turnaround of the bike. We were in the lead. And shortly after the turnaround on our way back, I shifted my gears to, he sped things up, and I shifted my gears, and my derailleur snapped off my bike. And so I was not able to actually finish the race that year, but I'd been with Dave for almost 4 hours of racing at that point. And, that's about half the amount of time it takes the winners to win that thing. And so even though I didn't achieve that dream of crossing the line, there was something about that. Obviously, if I'm with the best guy in the world at that time in the lead, I felt like maybe I can be the champion of this race. And so that was really when the bigger dream was born. Of course, I can look back now, and I know that had I not had my derailleur break, I would have completely blown up on the run, because that's what I did so many times in the future. But it was a good, in a certain way, it was a good ending to that first story, because I didn't go through the tough stuff, but it really sparked a bigger dream. And that's when shortly after that, I was approached by an investment company in the San Diego area who was starting a triathlon team, and they were going to be paying some of the people a salary, and they said, we'd love to pay you a salary so you could just train and race. And I'm like, sign me up. How could it get any better than that? And then shortly after that, then I was a lot of the companies that supported the sport at that time also engaged me to be a spokesperson for them. And all of a sudden I'm able to, just devote day and night to becoming the best I could be in the sport. And it was just something that, there was no grand plan to it in my mind. It just evolved, and it turned into something just amazing for me.
So let me ask you about this first race then. You've turned up and thought, maybe you can crack the top 100. Maybe I can cross the finish line, and it would be really cool to crack the top 100. And you come out of the water on the hip of Dave Scott. You ride next to the guy for the first 4 hours. I mean, the mental transformation that must have happened for you during the 3 odd hours of riding you were out there for. Do you remember what you were thinking as you were riding along next to Dave Scott?
I was thinking, I can't believe this, because I only had my only athletic experience was in swimming. And, I swam for 12 years. I never made it to even Olympic trials. So I wasn't world class in swimming, but here I am, I'm with the guy who in 1982 was the best Ironman distance triathlete in the world. And so, at first it blew my mind. And then later when I was thinking about it, I realized, I'm not put together genetically to be a great swimmer. I don't have the height. I don't have the knee flexibility. I don't have giant flippers for feet. My shoulders just don't dislocate those sockets like a great swimmer, and they can just get this free motion. My body kind of fights itself in the water. However, 12 years of swimming really built a cardiovascular engine for sure. And then when I look at how my body is put together, I'm much more suited for cycling and running, and those just came so naturally for me. I didn't know, when I started on the start line that day in '82, that how good my toolbox was for the sport of triathlon. But by the end of the day, I thought, okay, there's something here for me. And it wasn't just physical either. I knew that a sport that, a race that takes 8 or 9 hours to complete, a lot of it's going to be mental. A lot of it's going to be how you manage yourself. but early in that race, I also started to see that so much of the outcome of the day was going to be how I managed myself just mentally. That obviously you need some genetics, some training, but when the race is happening, it never really looks or feels like you had thought it would be. And so how I was managing the experience when I was getting hot or tired, that was going to have a huge impact on the day. And I knew that was one of my weaknesses when I swam. If somebody got a half a stroke ahead of me, they would win the race because I never felt like I could come back on them. But early in my career in triathlon, I realized that that's not how it plays out. I watched some other races throughout that summer and did a few races, and guys came from behind. They weren't the guys in the lead the whole way. Usually the winner was somebody who moved through the pack and ended up crossing the finish line, obviously in first, but they rarely led the longest. And so I really made that a big focus of how I prepared for my racing. Obviously I had to do a lot of the miles, swimming, cycling, and running, doing it wise, doing the right mix of base and speed work and all the stuff that we know physiologically you need to do. But I also really early on started working on just trying to figure out a mindset that would enable me to overcome the difficult moments in the race. And it's so easy to practice that because, there's plenty of training sessions where all of a sudden you're not in the mood for it anymore, or something starts to, the intensity is a little bit higher than you thought it would be to maintain whatever goal you have for that session. And so you get so many opportunities to practice how you're going to overcome those difficult moments and just stick with it. And that became a huge part of my preparation.
Wow, that's really interesting because I think that is the ultimate test of the long distance 70.3 and Ironman, isn't it? The fact that you can't just push all the time. It's a sub-maximal effort, but you're going to feel really tired and really sore at different places, and your mind's going to say, I've just had enough of this. And it's managing that's more of a challenge than actually building the fitness, I think, a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yeah, the fitness, that's actually, that's a fun part for most people. Going out there and doing the training and seeing how your body responds, it's really cool to see where especially when you compare, like, example, myself, where I started and where I ended up. I'd never even really run before. I'd never really cycled before. And so each year, the fitness in those two sports continue to build. But I also, again, going back to what I was just saying, I also saw that, when the gun goes off, you can't go back and do more training or less training. You can't go back and change your nutrition or get more sleep. You have to deal with what's happening on the day. And that's also what makes, I think, the sport so special, is that it really does test you as a person. It tests your inner character and, can you rise up against the challenges that come your way? A competitor that starts pulling away when you're not feeling good, or maybe something with your nutrition isn't working right and you feel sick to your stomach, or maybe you get a flat tire in the middle of the race, and what do you do? Or your quads start to say, hey, I've had enough, I don't want to run another step, but you know that you will take that next step. And ultimately, that champion's mindset is one where you're just quiet inside. It's not like you're asleep. You're very aware of everything and you're very tuned into what's going on, but you don't let the negatives affect you. And if you're not feeling good, it's like you don't have to feel positive to give everything you have in that moment. And so it becomes a kind of like, there's periods where everything's flowing and there's a period where you feel like you're fighting it. And you go back and forth and back and forth. But that champion's mindset is one where, for me, I just kept had to bring myself back to just sort of taking that breath and just going, okay, this is what today is looking like.
Yeah.
And, rarely does the day look like your pre-race visualization. We all have these positive things that we focus on, in our mind and how great it's going to be and all that. And then you get out there and it's like, whoa, baby,
Yeah.
this is
This is
different than I thought it would be. But in the end, you make it past that, and those become the greatest stories that you tell and share with your friends.
Yeah, one of the things I remember both you and Brant saying on the workshop was it's your ability to reset in a moment like that and say, okay, well, this isn't going well right now, but it'll change. And the negative, what was that phrase you used? Like the negative thoughts are like clouds and they'll pass across. And so many of us, I think when we start to feel bad, our expectation is we're going to feel bad forever. And the reality is, if you can learn to reset that, it's a very different experience, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you hit right on it. When you're in a down patch, you feel like it's going to last forever. Like it's your entire life is death and doom,
Yeah.
But if you realize it's just a moment, and maybe it will be a terrible race from there to the finish, but it's never a loss, So let me give you an example. In 1984, my cycling had really come up a few notches, and so when I went to Kona that year, this was my third Ironman. When I went to Kona that year, my plan was to really push the bike, and I ended up coming off the bike, I think about 12 minutes ahead of Dave Scott. He was the main guy that I was concerned about. So I had this massive lead. I ran through the town of Kona, which the way the course was laid out that year was the first 10 kilometers of the run. And there's thousands of people cheering, and I just thought, man, I have this thing locked up. There's no way anybody's going to catch me. I feel so amazing right now. Then I ran up Paulani Road, Paulani Hill. It's about I don't know, half mile, 3/4 of a mile uphill, straight uphill, to get out onto the main part of the run course where you run about 20 miles. And it's, so you go from this amazing high energy, crowds cheering environment to this long uphill where it has the wind is usually moving about the same speed as you, so your core temperature just starts to rise. There's nothing to cool you down. And then you make a left out onto the Queen K Highway, and you're faced with 20 miles of stark black lava, with the only thing out there being an aid station every mile. And at the bottom of that hill, I felt like I was going to be the champ. At the top of the hill, I felt like every ounce of energy had drained out of my body. And, I was like I was hit with a bag of lead bricks. I knew that there was absolutely no way that I was going to be able to run every one of those miles. And at some point that I would start walking. I held off as long as I could, but my nutrition wasn't working. And eventually I did start walking, and that 12 minutes when I was walking got eaten up in about 2 miles. And Dave just, when I think I held him off till about 4 miles ago, and he passed me. I was walking, but so I could have looked at and just felt sorry for myself out there when I went from running to slowly jogging to barely jogging to walking. But I thought, I have a choice here. I know I'm not going to win. I know that I'm not going to be able to hold Dave Scott off. But what can I do to make this day a success? And I just said, I'm going to give 100% of what I have to give, even when I'm walking, even when I'm barely moving here.
Yeah.
So that at the end of the day, I know that at least, even though I'm in this 20% of my potential situation here, because I'm walking, I'm not running, at least I'm going to give everything I have. And in the end, I crossed the finish line in 5th. And that year, they brought the top 5 people up on the podium at the awards the following night. So had I just given up and just sort of crossed the line, I wouldn't have even gotten 5th. I would have been 6th or 8th or 10th. But I made the top 5, and I was able to hold my head high because I knew that even though that I was walking, I gave 100% of what I had, even when I was walking. And then I would, my energy would come back a little, and I could jog for a little bit, and I'd walk again, and I'd jog. And that, not only did I had like a saving grace for that day, but that was a huge lesson to learn for the future because I saw how to give everything I had, even in a moment that was less than perfect. And so during the Ironman races that I won, I still had moments where I was not at 100%. However, I was able to give 100% of those in those moments when I was maybe functioning at 80% or 85% or 75% of my real potential. And then I'd come back and then I'd be back to 100%. Had I not had that really tough race in 84, I wouldn't have learned how to do that. And so I would have given up in those other races where I was, I was still doing okay, but it wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
Instead, I gave 100% of what I had to give, and in the end, that's why one of the reasons I was able to win 6 Ironman races in 6 starts, because I kept that champion's mindset even in the difficult moments where I wasn't functioning at my best.
It's an incredible story of I think it's easy for normal people to watch your races going on TV, and I sit there and imagine you guys are feeling fantastic the whole time, and you don't feel pain the same way that we do, and you're just kind of gutsing it out against each other. But the reality is, the more I hear you talk, the more I realize your mind is exactly like mine is when I'm racing. And it swings from I feel fantastic to I feel awful. But you've spent much more time practicing coming back from that feeling of I feel awful than any of the normal people, and that's something I don't think gets talked about enough.
Yeah, there's so many sports where the top folks talk about their strategy of what they did to enable them to win, but there's so few times you hear the story of what was really going on inside of them.
Yeah.
And how they overcame those really difficult patches, or what they did to rise up against their doubt. Somebody who wins a race, you just, like you said, you just kind of assume that they're in the zone the entire way, and that they're immune to pain, and they never felt like it was that difficult or whatever. Like the last Ironman I did in 1995, I came off the bike 13 and a half minutes behind the leader, Thomas Hellriegel. And that's another story I can tell. But
hey, yeah, you know what? Let's come back to that later on, man. Don't blow that story now.
Yeah, but the key thing as it relates to this is that on the TV broadcast, it looked like I was in complete control as I marched along and ended up closing that gap. When in reality, there were 1,000 moments when I wanted to quit, but I had to rise above that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So listen, we've covered 83, and you finished. You didn't finish in 82. We haven't covered 83 when you came back, and you actually placed third in 83, didn't you? So you kind of had that idea of, okay, the pieces are falling into place here now.
Yeah, that was great. It was it was my second Ironman, first one that I finished. I raced it somewhat conservatively because I did want to finish, and yeah, that was in some ways one of the coolest races. Because that was my first Ironman that I completed. I was third, and so that seemed to kind of reaffirm that, okay, maybe I really do have the potential here to become the Ironman champion, to be the first one to cross that finish line. And that's what then led on to 1984, that race I was just telling in a little more detail.
Yeah. And then at this point, am I right in thinking that Kona, it sounds like Kona became, you were incredibly successful across all distances, from winning the World Championship, Olympic distance, the 10 Nice victories. Did Kona become something of an obsession for you in the same way that it is for a lot of people these days?
It was, I wouldn't call it an obsession. It was just it was a puzzle that I was just having a very hard time figuring out.
Okay.
The first 6 Ironmans that I did in Hawaii, I did not win. That first race in '83 that I completed the distance, my time was, I don't know, 9.5 hours, give or take. So, if you really look at that, there wasn't anything there that was saying, okay, this guy, when he first wins his first Ironman, he's going to go 8:09. He's going to go almost an hour and a half faster than he went in that first finish. But it just became a kind of like this gnawing thing at me that I thought I have to keep going back there until at least I have my best race. I finished third. I finished fifth twice. I finished second twice in those first six. But I just couldn't crack that top rung there and be the champion. By 1988, after my sixth start there, everybody was just saying, "Look, Mark, you're great as a triathlete, but there's something about Kona that's just not for you. Maybe it's too long. Maybe it's too hot. Go to the other races where you've shown that you can win. Go back to Nice. Go to do some more of the Olympic distance races, but don't waste your time trying to come back and just beating your head against the wall. You're not going to win Kona." And I was pretty close to saying, "Yeah, you guys are right," because we all have our family and friends that we rely on to tell us stuff that we don't want to admit ourselves.
Sure.
So in 1989, I was in the winter, I was kind of thinking, okay, what am I going to do this year? What races? And I really started thinking about Hawaii, and I thought, walking the marathon is definitely not my best race performance. I wanted to go back there one more time and just have a solid race, a good swim, a good bike, and a good run. I didn't know if it would be enough to beat Dave Scott. I didn't know, but I needed to go back one more time. And so that was a real shift for me, because I had been trying to win it, and I wasn't really focused on doing my best. And so in '89, I thought, forget trying to win. Just go there, do your best so that you have peace with it. And that's kind of how I approached everything I did that year, was just finding more peace within this immense challenge that I was trying to do. Of course, if I could win, I'd be happy, but that wasn't the main focus anymore. It was just going there and really having a solid race where I raced from start to finish and I didn't fall apart. And that was the goal. And that actually became a turning point in how I focused and prepared. If you're trying to beat somebody else or do a particular time, there's sort of like a success and a failure to it. Either you did it or you didn't, which is fine. It's good to have those sort of concrete markers so you don't kid yourself. However, your best performance may have nothing to do with a great time or a top finish.
Yeah.
And it goes back to like what I was telling that story of '84. That was a great race, even though I was walking, because I learned so much. And I tell a lot of the people that I coach through my coaching, markallencoaching.com, I tell them the only bad race is one where you don't learn something from it. So whether you hit your goals or you didn't, if you don't learn something, that was a waste of your time. So every race, take time to give yourself a little distance from it, and then look back and reflect and say, what did I learn out of that experience? What nugget was in there that will help me not only become a better triathlete, but to become a better person? And with that, you transform your whole experience of what sport can bring to your life.
Yeah, and there's a bigger picture here that I'm starting to see as well, in that everybody talks about the power of the island of Hawaii. That there's a spiritual power there. There's a power on the island, and you need to go there with the right intent. There's a lot of people who don't usually believe in that kind of stuff, get kind of what's the phrase? Superstitious around the island of Hawaii, and it's almost as though some kind of shift happened there between you wanting to win and be the champion and beat people, to wanting to go and kind of just let me give everything that I have, let me give my best performance, and whether that's enough or not to win, I'll be happy with that. There's a subtle shift has happened there, but it's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah. Like I said, you can have the most amazing experience without having an amazing result. on the, when when the results are printed and your time shows and your place in your age group or whatever. And that's when sport becomes like almost like an art form. It goes from having to hit a particular time to feel enriched by the experience to really feeling amazing because you did something that you just never thought you could before. And maybe that is doing a time that you never thought, or a place that you never thought you could achieve. But it can also be overcoming something that you never thought you could, a down moment or a difficult patch. And that's what shifted for me in 1989. When I went there that year, I just sat and I had a little talk with the island. I said, hey, just let me come here with my strength. Let me just come here and have a great race. And, I got this feeling like the island was talking, saying, you can have what you've come here for, but it'll take courage. And I didn't really know what that meant.
Yeah.
I had an idea, but I didn't really quite know. And so, that was one of the iconic races that day. It was my 7th Ironman. Dave Scott and I swam within seconds of each other. We biked within seconds of each other. I just shadowed him the whole day. I thought, you know what, this guy knows how to race this race. He knows how to pace it. I don't. I've gone off the front and I've blown up. So let me just stick with him and see how the best does it. And so, I stayed with him the entire bike ride, just shadowing every move that he did. And then on the run, we started through the town of Kona side by side. He set a blistering fast pace. It was below 6-minute miles. And I thought, this is insane. But the other side of me said, hey, if I blow up, at least I go down with the best guy in the world, So once we got out on the lava fields, the pace sort of came back into the realm of normal. And, we were 2 people in the lead of this race, side by side, on the Queen K Highway, which is a very wide road. And we were bumping into each other because neither of us wanted to give an inch or a second. We weren't speaking, but we didn't need to. You could just sense how the other person was feeling. And I could tell that Dave was as solid as any person I'd ever raced. There was no tricky surge that I could do that would break him mentally. I had to just outrace him. And it was very intense, very, to just know that I had to completely outrace this guy if I was going to, cross the line in front of him, which it did seem like maybe I had the chance to, because it was around the half marathon point. We were still together. We were in the lead. We were on a pace that was going to shatter his previous world's record. But then he started surging, and he'd drop his pace down to a 6-minute mile, and then he'd back off, and then he'd drop it down, and then he'd back off, and every time it got harder and harder to stay with him. And finally, he dropped it down to 6-minute pace, and he didn't back off. And I realized he's going to hold this for the rest of this marathon. And it completely blew my mind, because nobody had run anywhere close to that speed, especially in the last half of the marathon. And then I just lost it completely mentally. My mind was just, Dave is going to win. I can't beat this guy. My legs are killing me. I'm trying to have my best race. It would have been so great to win it, but there's no way I can do it. I just wanted to quit, and finally it got so hard to stay with him that even that negative mental chatter just left, because I took every ounce of what I had just to keep one foot going in front of the other, and to match, and not let him open up a gap. And my mind went quiet. And in that moment of quiet, that's when the whole world changed for me. 2 days before the race, I had been reading flipping through a magazine, not really reading what was in there, until one page caught my attention. And it was an advertisement for a workshop that was going to be taking place in Mexico, teaching about the way of life of the Indians in that area, the Huichol Indians. And I didn't know anything about the Huichol Indians. I didn't know anything about their tradition, But what caught my attention was the two shamans or medicine men that were going to be leading the workshop. One was a 110-year-old Huichol Indian named Don Jose, and the other was his adopted grandson, Brant Secunda. And they both had this look on their face that was very peaceful but very powerful. And athletically, that's what you're searching for in a race, to feel calm or peace or a sense of trust that no matter how the day ends up, it's going to be perfect. But at the same time, to feel your strength or your flow or your connection to the effort that you're putting out there, and really just being completely engaged in it in a way that sort of makes all the pain background noise. And so anyway, I saw the pictures of these two great shamans, and I kind of stopped and looked for a second, and then I just kind of kept flipping through the magazine. Didn't really think about it. Well, back in the race, here I am, my 7th Ironman. We've passed the half marathon point. Dave Scott drops his pace down to a 6-minute mile. He doesn't back off. My mind goes crazy with all the stuff that's trying to sabotage my effort. Finally, my mind goes quiet because it's just too hard to even think a thought. And then Don Jose's image came back to me. And I thought, but that old guy doesn't need to win an Ironman to feel good about his life. He's happy just to be alive. He has that sense of peace and power that I've been searching for in this race for so many years. And all of a sudden, I thought, oh my God, it's here. It's been here all along, and I just haven't seen it. I mean, look at this. I'm with the best guy in the world. Dave Scott, he's won 6 Ironman races. Nobody else has given this guy a run for his money. There's still 13 miles to go in the marathon. Something might change, and I could just feel this like life force energy coming from that thought or that vision of Don Jose. And I just started getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And then to bring it back full circle to that little talk that I had with the island before the race, all of a sudden I had these blisters on the bottom of my feet that had popped right on the arches, that very sensitive part of your foot, on both arches.
Oh, man.
Blood was coming through my shoes. My quads were completely killing me. The muscles were just getting torn down. And all of a sudden, I'm having this battle with myself. On one side, I thought, oh my God, I can win this race. And the other side was saying, but I don't know if I can take another step. And so it's like, I know I can win, but I don't know if I can even take another step. Then that word came back that the island said, you have to have courage. And I realized just because I could win, I had to have the courage to complete it, to take every step of that marathon and give it everything I had, regardless of how I felt, regardless of how many blisters I had, regardless of how much my quads hurt. I needed to have the courage to stick with it and keep going. And I ended up, Dave Scott and I stayed with each other till about mile 24 and a half of the marathon, 8 hours into the race. We passed one last aid station out on the lava fields before you make one long, you have to climb this one long upgrade at the very end of the marathon out there before you drop back down into the town of Kona and do the pass to the finish line. I had seen that Dave was really strong on the downhills, but that I was stronger on the uphills. And so when we got to the bottom of that hill, I thought, okay, I'm going to grab one last glass of Gatorade or Coke or whatever, and then try and pull away on this upgrade. And Dave had sort of moved himself so he had the inside track to the aid station. So he reached over because he's thinking the same thing, like, okay, this is it. This is the last moment before, we break each other. He grabbed for his glass or whatever. I came in right behind him, ready to get my last little bit of fuel, and something just said, go. And I pulled my hand back. I didn't get that last glass of sustenance, of fuel, and I just started sprinting as fast as I could. And in the 3 or 4 seconds it took Dave to reach over, grab his glass, and look back, I'd put a gap of 5 or 10 feet on him, and it blew his mind. Like all of a sudden, somebody was pulling away from him on the part of the course where he was the most dominant, or he had been anyway. and you can see it in the race footage. His shoulders
Yeah,
come up, he's
yeah,
rocking, and all of a sudden, he's having to deal with a fear that he's never had to before. And the gap continued to grow. I got to the top of the hill before him. I raced down to the bottom of the hill as fast as I could because I knew that he would make up time. I got to the bottom, I looked back and I couldn't see him, and then I knew that I really had it. There was no way he was going to close the gap. My legs were going to carry me to the finish, and it just then the emotion started to come out. The whole day I had been holding everything steady. You can't let yourself get too excited. You can't let yourself get down. You have to stay right in that very steady point, and that's actually something that Brant Secunda really emphasizes. And I started studying with him right after that race, and he said, always strive to be steady, kind of just stay in the middle of life, not too high, not too low. As I was finally coming down that last stretch on Ali'i Drive, the emotion just started seeping out of me. I just got the hugest smile on my face, and the tears were running down my cheeks, and I just knew that, oh my God, I've finally done this.
yeah.
And I
You've got
crossed the
the
finish line,
fist
won my
pump going
first.
on, and it's amazing that last stretch with you running down. I encourage anybody who hasn't watched that to go back and see the YouTube video because it's a classic bit of world sport, isn't it?
It is. There's just thousands of people cheering, and they've been a part of your journey all day. They've been following and tracking what's going on, and I think a lot of people that year especially knew what I'd gone through the previous 6 years and not come up with that victory. And so it was kind of like a celebration for a lot of people that day. And Dave Scott did his best time by over 17 minutes. I did my best time on that day by almost 30. And the difference in our times at the end was only 58 seconds. Very, very small margin in such a long race. But it was a real turning point for Ironman itself. It really showed that race was not about survival, that it could be raced all the way to the finish. And from 89 forward, after that performance, that the two of us put together because of each other, everybody's mindset changed, and it no longer became something that we were trying to survive. It became something that we were truly trying to race.
And you guys you ran was it 2:40:04 for the marathon? Something like, there was only a few seconds outside 2:40. And am I right in thinking that the time included your transition 2 time as well that year?
It did, yeah. My split was 2:40:04.
I'm such a geek knowing that.
The run time did start right when I crossed into the transition area on my bike. So it included, the run to get my bag and putting on my run clothes, getting on my run shoes, and then finally, all of that was in that time. So the actual run split was under 2:40.
Yeah.
But the official split was 2:40:04, and that stood for 27 years. So that was pretty cool.
And so I wanted to ask you now that the transition from being Mark Allen, just the triathlete, obviously you've had this experience in the lava field of seeing the vision of Don Jose and Brant Secunda. How long after you crossed the finish line did you decide, right, I'm going to explore this, I'm going to find these guys and go and study with them?
Well, that was interesting because I got back to the condo, after the race, and my support crew was asking me for details. What happened out there? How did you win it? What, tell us. And I said, well, I was ready to give up, and then I had this vision of this 110-year-old Huichol Indian shaman, and they thought, ooh, this guy's flipped, It's not quite what you're expecting to hear from somebody who just won a world championship, but it had such a clear and significant impact on my race that I thought there's something greater here that is important for me to explore. And so it was actually shortly after that I went down to Mexico and experienced a retreat with Brant. Don Jose actually passed away just a few weeks before that workshop, so I never met him in person.
Oh wow!
But obviously, I had a strong connection to him, and in that workshop, it was like, for the first time, I was experiencing a sense of just being happy to be alive. Like I didn't have to do anything to feel good about life. Like
Yeah.
life itself is a good thing, and then on top, and then everything from there is just bonus. And that was a huge shift for me, because I had been hoping that I could, win Ironman, and then I'd feel really good about my life, right? And
Right.
that's so backwards. It's like inner peace, then outer results, not the other way around. And so I have studied with Brant ever since that time. It's been, over 27 years now, and it's just a way to connect with the spirit of nature, which science is showing now that we spend time in nature, stress hormones are reduced. It activates the creative problem-solving part of our brain, so we can come up with ideas and solutions that we never could through logic. Um, Human beings are just hardwired to feel good in nature, and that's such a big tenet of Huichol shamanism, just being in nature. And that was such a natural thing for me because I trained in San Diego near the ocean. I trained in Boulder, Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. I loved those natural environments, and that's when I felt the best. And, Brant was um, really instrumental in helping me to continue to develop that ability to just be quiet. Um, a lot of the tools and practices he teaches, one of the side effects or the positive effects is that it enables you to get your mind to just be quiet. And when we have that silence inside, then it's like we can tune into things that we could never come up with otherwise. So, simple example, I'm reaching for that last glass of Gatorade and something just says go. That was totally illogical. There is no amount of logic that would have said, don't get that last bit of fuel for that last push. It was completely illogical, but that was the solution. That was the answer that enabled me to start to make the break from Dave. So it's been an amazing journey with Brant. He also is an incredible healer, and so there were many times where, I'm like everybody else. I was kind of to be at peak level of performance. I pushed my body, and there were times where I went over the edge and would get injured or get sick. And sometimes the doctors would say, "Well, there's nothing we can do. You need to take 6 weeks off and just give your body a break." And I go, "No, I need to go win Ironman in 6 weeks." And so, that's when, for sure, Brant did healings and would bring my body back, and was such a huge part of enabling me to win 6 Ironmans and 6 starts, something that nobody's done.
And the thing that I really loved about the philosophy that I took away from the workshop I did with you guys was that I think lots of people who are involved in triathlon, in fact, lots of people in general in the world, we know we feel better when we're out in nature. We know, or perhaps we don't consciously realize it, but when somebody points out to you, hey, do you know what? If you spend time in nature, you actually feel better. Your mind will clear. The fact that there's a kind of framework to understand why you feel better when you're out in nature is such a massive thing in the Western world when so many people don't connect with whatever kind of religion that they were possibly brought up with.
Yeah, it's how we're hardwired to. Human beings evolved in a very natural environment. We're no more genetically adapted to surviving in a shopping mall than a saber-toothed tiger. Our genetics evolved not in a movie theater, but by watching sunrises and sunsets, by walking and moving over uneven landscape, by um, just feeling a sense of well-being, by being in community, and by being out in that environment. You don't have to have any awareness of it for it to have that effect on you. However, if you adopt practices and tools to actively foster that relationship, as Brant's teachings help you do, then it like supercharges the effect. And
Yeah.
that became such a huge part of racing an Ironman for me, because that is a very powerful natural environment, the Big Island. It is like none of the other islands in the Hawaiian chain. It's very raw. It's very demanding. It's very intense. At the same time, it's very nurturing in the sense that when you test yourself in that intense environment, the island has a way of giving you things that maybe are difficult to swallow, but at the same time will enhance your life forever. And I think that's why people just feel this magic about doing the Ironman in Hawaii. It's they gain something from it that they know they would have never gotten anywhere else, and it's because of the environment. It's not the distance, it's not even the heat, it's not the sun. It's competing on the Big Island of Hawaii. Because there are other hot Ironmans, and none of them have that unique quality that is the Ironman on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's just amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's something that over that following 6 year period, it sounds like you almost got more in tune with nature and more in tune with the island of Hawaii itself in terms of, you said that first year when you won, you kind of had a little chat with the island, but did that become much more conscious as the years went by? You were trying to tune in much more with that.
Yeah, one of the things that Brant says that it's important to feel at home no matter where you go on the earth. The altar of Mother Earth it's all sacred, and so I tried to tune into that sense of the Big Island being a very sacred place. And as I studied with him, it became more of a place where I really did feel at home, which was so different and in stark contrast to how the Big Island felt to me prior to meeting Brant. I would show up on the Big Island and it was almost like I was being suffocated, or like, that thing of fear, like, like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I've got to race in this stuff, and in this lava, and it's black and it's stark and it's, raw and it's windy, and, you know, that kind of, that's not feeling at home. But studying with Brant, it was just this dramatic shift. Like I would show up and I would get off of the plane, and that same air would hit me, and I would just breathe it in and just go, this is so great, And in the race, even in the most intense moments, I'd catch myself kind of looking around to the left or to the right, seeing the lava and how amazing that is, the design in it, and the ruggedness and the beauty that's in that. And so you can guess which mindset is the one that brought the best racing out of me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now we've touched on this a little bit already, but you and Brant now run workshops together, don't you, based around the book that you wrote together. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called, the workshops and the book are called Fit Soul, Fit Body, 9 Keys to a Healthier, Happier You. And each one of the keys it's kind of like the roadmap of what enabled me to win the Ironman. So, it's managing stress, it's learning to quiet your mind, connecting with nature, slowing down to get faster. That was a huge part of how I trained, doing a lot of aerobic base building and then fine tuning that with a little bit of speed work so that I didn't burn my body out. Eating in a way that nourishes my body and helps it rebuild. That key is called invite your inner caveman to the table. But there's also other tools in the book. Honoring yourself, meaning find good thoughts, take time to be quiet. Indeed, exercise, but don't underdo it and don't overdo it. And then there's one called Know and Set Your Quest. And that was, in retrospect, that was such a huge thing for me in 1989. Like I said, I changed what my quest was. It wasn't to try to go win the Ironman. It was to go and have my best race. And then the sort of the partner key to that is living what you ask for. I had to have that courage to keep taking those steps, even though my body was saying, hey, it's time to quit. I know that to live what I asked for meant that I had to rise up above those challenges on the day, and to then indeed take it to victory in '89 against Dave. They're simple keys. Each one can help a person indeed feel healthier, to be happier, and those are priceless commodities these days. To feel
pretty
healthy
important,
and
right?
to enjoy happiness. And
Yeah.
it's so simple that all the keys are very it doesn't matter whether you're trying to win an Ironman, lose weight, whether you're just starting to sort of maybe restructure your inner environment so that you are more positive. One of the last keys that I'll mention is that we explain how to deal with negative emotions like fear, anger, and jealousy, because they're all human emotions that every single person on this planet has. But managing those so that you can come into a more positive mindset it's like turning the lights on.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I bought your book when it first came out, and I think I was hoping it was going to be, although it doesn't proclaim to be a triathlon coaching manual, I was hoping I was going to find some kind of training plan in there that was going to make me better. And I read it and I'm kind of like, well, okay, that's kind of cool, but it wasn't the training plan I was hoping for. And then sort of, it must be 10 years later now that I read it again after I'd been and done your workshop, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I get it now. This is the fundamental stuff. It's not the stuff that I'm going to try and lay on top of a training plan. This is the stuff that everything else is going to sit on top of. And if you get all those basics right, having that still quiet mind during racing isn't an additional thing that you can add on as a bit of extra training on top of swim, bike, run. It's what's most important out of all of the three of them, I think.
It's the keys in Fit Soul Fit Body help build the foundation, like you said, upon which you can create great experiences in your life, whether they're racing, whether they're personal transformation, whether it's just feeling better day to day. And that's pretty cool. You can, all of our workshops are always listed on Brant's website, shamanism.com, in his upcoming program section. I don't think we have another one scheduled until next spring, but we've done them here in the U.S. We've done them in South America, over in Europe, a lot of different places, and so maybe we'll be in your neighborhood pretty soon.
You've got to come to the UK, man. After I talked about having done the workshop on the podcast a few weeks ago now when I got back, and we had 3 or 4 people say, hey, tell us when there's going to be one in the UK. So people are interested, Mark. It'd be great if you could run one over here. It'd be fantastic, man.
All right, we'll work on that for sure.
So listen, I want you to wrap this up for us now before you go with the final story that you started to touch on, the 95 World Championships. It's your, am I right in thinking you took 1994 off? You'd won 5 in a row up to 1993, and you took 1994 off basically because you felt like your body needed to recharge, right?
Yeah, I was, winning 5 Ironmans in a row was a big demand, and in '94 I knew that there was just no way that I had the reserve to put in the effort it would take to have another great racer in Kona, and so it didn't matter how much desire I had, my body just wouldn't be able to take it. So I took '94. I stepped back from doing a lot of the long distance training that I had done in previous years, hoping that my body would regenerate, recharge, because I did want to go back another time, because I really felt like I had just a little bit more that I could put into a performance. And so 95 was the year that I did that. I came back, I was 37 years old, which nobody had ever won the Ironman as a 37-year-old at that point. I was trying to win 6 Ironmans and 6 starts. Nobody had done that, not even Dave. He had a loss in between his string. So I was, even before I got to the start line, I had a couple things sort of stacked up against me, a couple impossibles, a couple things that nobody had ever done, which to me was exciting actually. But I couldn't Google how do you win 6 Ironmans and 6 starts and the last one is a 37-year-old. There was no answer. I had to discover it myself, and so I really relied a lot that year on the work with Brant, because I knew that I could not do the same volume of training that I'd done in the past. I could not do the same volume of training that the young guys 10 and 15 years younger than me were going to be doing to get ready. So physically, I was past the peak. However, I really felt like, in that race, the more time you spend kind of in that champion's mindset where you're quiet, the more time that I would be completely and fully engaged in giving everything I had. The young guys, if something starts to go south for them and they're struggling, if it takes them 4 or 5 minutes to kind of pull themselves together, that's 4 or 5 minutes where they're not given a full effort. If I could do it just in one breath, just going, okay, then you're fully engaged. That takes about 5 seconds. That's a big difference. And there are thousands of moments in the race where you have to pull yourself back together. And so working with Brant very intensely that year was a big part of my training. He did a lot of ceremonies and healings to get my body to come around, because even by midsummer I was still tired, and I thought, man, it's been a year and a half and I'm still not firing on all cylinders. I mean, by July I'd only had maybe 4 or 5 days that really felt like I was on top of it, and the rest of the time I felt like I was still struggling. And so in early August, Brant, I went to a retreat in Alaska for 8 days, and he did a number of ceremonies and healings on me to really charge my body up. And you have to understand, in early August, that's when everybody's really ramping up their training to get ready for Kona 2 months later. I took 8 days of no swimming, no cycling, and no running, completely contrary to what every other triathlete on the planet was doing. But I knew how important this was, because winning Ironman is not just a physical effort. It takes everything you have physically, mentally, spiritually to have your best day. Things seemed to be working. I ended up having a great swim, having taken the lead early on the bike, earlier than ever, actually. My heart rate was actually pretty low when I took the lead, and I thought, man, this is going to be easy. This was about 15 miles into the bike, but right away, guys started passing me. First, it was Jürgen Zach, one of the great cyclists in the sport. Right behind him, another guy comes by. It's Thomas Hellriegel, who was 24 years old, 13 years younger than me. And he passed me, and he looked like he was on a motorcycle. And I thought, man, these guys, the two of them working together, I can't let them go. And so I upped my pace. But right away, my heart rate started to get too high. And I knew that if I let my heart rate go too high on the bike, then I would blow up on the run. And I thought that's too big of a risk. But I also kind of calculated in my head and thought, well, I'll let them go, but they'll probably only get 4 or 5 minutes on me by the end of the bike. And I knew that I could run faster than both of them. Unfortunately, when I came off the bike, I was 13 and a half minutes behind Hellriegel, who was in the lead. That's a little different than a 5-minute gap. In fact, nobody had closed that big of a gap to be the champion. So all of a sudden, now I've got a third level of impossibility, of asking myself to do something that nobody had done before. And boy, I came out of the transition area, and I was just trying to, keep my mind quiet, because I knew that thoughts at that point were going to be very critical. And, right at the top of the first hill, there's like thousands of people cheering, and there was these these 3 old ladies who were looking at me, and I could see one of them, she's clapping, she's going, "Go Mark, go Mark, go Mark. He doesn't look so good." And that thought sunk in, and about a mile later, I felt so lousy. I thought, I can't even finish, and then I couldn't hold that negative stuff out anymore. It's like, Hellriegel, he's 13 and a half minutes ahead of me. I got to make up 30 seconds a mile every mile if I'm going to catch him at the finish. I can't do that. Hey, there's my hotel. Just call it a day. Living what you ask for, one of the keys in our book, means that you have to take things to completion. If I gave up, if I quit, there was no way I could honor the effort that Brant had done to get me ready. There was no way I could honor the effort of my training partners who had helped me that year. There was no way I could honor just the fact that I was trying one more time. So I was able to get my mind to be quiet, and then the answer really came. Something just said, just get to the finish line. This is your final Ironman. Honor yourself and your career by at least getting to the finish line. And I realized, the way I felt right then, if I could get to the finish, that indeed would be a great success, because I was really not feeling good. And literally, I said, I'm going to do it no matter what it takes, even if I have to walk every step of this marathon. I got into the sport in 1982 to be a finisher. I'm closing out my Ironman career, and I know that I'm going to be a finisher. And in the instant that I made that commitment, Greg Welch in 4th place, 10 seconds ahead of me, stopped in the middle of the road to stretch his back. I passed him, made the first pass on the marathon, and then suddenly it's like I was back in the game. I went from fifth to fourth, eventually to third, eventually past Jürgen Zach to move into second. With 8 miles to go, I was told that Hellriegel was 4 minutes ahead of me. So, I was making up 30 seconds a mile, but I was still only on pace to catch him at the finish line. That's not a good place to catch a guy 13 years younger than you when you are sprinting for a world championship. I needed something else. I couldn't find it. Hellriegel, he's still 4 minutes ahead. I can't even see the guy. I'm not making up enough time. I need something, but I can't find it. Finally, I got my mind to be quiet. And something came back to me that Brand had said. He said, if you need help, call out to that island. It will help you. That island is alive. It's just as alive as you or I, and it will hear you. And so I just drew all my attention away from Hellriegel. And I said, hey, Big Island, help me here. I'm going to give everything I have, even if I completely blow up in these 8 miles, but I need something extra. The next mile, I made up 40 seconds. The one after that, a little over 50. The mile after that, I made up 1 minute and 15 seconds on the guy who'd been leading the race for over 6 hours. Finally, at mile 23, I came up behind him, closed the gap, made the final pass of my Ironman career, and indeed went on to win that 6th and final title. And it was such an impossible day. It was a huge risk because I knew that if indeed I won, people would say, I would go down as one of the greats in our sport. But if I didn't win, I wouldn't be remembered as Mark Allen, the 5-time Ironman champ. I'd be remembered as Mark Allen, the old guy who came back for one too many. And that was a huge risk, but it had meaning for me to try. That's that key. Know and set your quest. I went there to give a performance that I had never done before. And indeed, because it was so impossible, and I had to overcome so many moments when I wanted to quit, that was the greatest race I ever put together in my career. And again, to go back to what I said very early in this podcast, the TV cameras never showed that. They didn't show, you couldn't see that I was literally steps away from just calling it quits and going to my hotel. You couldn't see the thousands of moments where I just wanted to give up. I mean, that was very, very hard to keep pulling myself back to that sort of champion's mindset where, okay, get quiet, stay fully engaged. Okay, get quiet, stay fully engaged, over and over and over and over again.
It's so good to hear that because so many people experience those moments, the I'm going to quit and go to the hotel moment. And to hear the 6-time world champion say, you know what, guys, this happened to me thousands of times during this race where all anybody knows about is I won, and you see the me sprinting down and waving the flag and doing the fist pump. It's such a key part of it, isn't it, to be able to get your mind to go quiet and keep resetting yourself like that. That's incredible, Mark.
Thank you.
Hey, well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling your story. I had a fantastic time when I came to your seminar. I massively encourage anybody to go to it and check it out if they get the chance. I hope we can get you to the UK to do one next year because it would just be brilliant. For me, this podcast has been amazing because, like you said, you remember watching your first Ironman on TV in 82. I remember watching my first Ironman in 89 when it was shown on the British TV show on a Sunday morning. They had this Wide World of Sport type thing on. And it was you and Dave Scott racing each other. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is insane. These guys have been, called my dad in, and these guys have ridden 112 miles around Hawaii. It's just the most amazing thing. And at the time, I was a track runner and wasn't capable of running further than 1,500 meters. And then years later, that thought popped in my head of, man, I wonder if I could do a half Ironman. I wonder if I could do an Ironman. And so the story that you set in motion set me in motion, sets other people in motion, and hopefully through the podcast we'll keep pushing that forward to more and more people to find out what they're actually really capable of, right?
Yeah, sounds great. Hopefully those stories will spark something for people, and you never know what you can do until you have an inspiration and just try. And then once once you set something in motion and indeed live what you ask for, meaning do the training, stick with it, even through the tough moments, in the end, then amazing things can happen. You can have great, amazing experiences and meet great people like yourself, and travel to great places. I hope Brant and I will work on that coming to the UK. That would be really fun.
Awesome. So if people want to find out more about you and Brant, the address is it's shamanism.com, isn't it?
Yeah, his workshops and the Fit Soul Fit Body retreats are listed there. And then for
You're-
my coaching, it's markallencoaching.com.
All right, fantastic stuff. Well, listen, Mark, it's been brilliant having you on the show. I know the audience are going to love this, and it's been fantastic for me to get to talk to you. So again, thank you very much.
Okay, guys, that was our interview with Mark Allen. Next week, as I mentioned, we'll be back with an interview with Cam Worth, the recent Ironman Hawaii bike course record holder. After riding that phenomenal 404, Helen's got a fantastic interview with him, in which he talks all kinds of stuff, including training with Chris Froome, as well as his move into Ironman triathlon racing. So make sure you tune in for that one. I hope you guys are having a great new year. I hope you're getting ready for jumping into some training and preparation for a 2018 season. And I wish you all the best, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you again next week as usual. You've been listening to a special edition of the Oxygen Addict Triathlon Podcast. I'm Coach Rob Wilby. Helen Murray's not with us this week, but until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. See you again soon. Thanks, everyone. See ya.